So I feel like each time we go to record the podcast, I'm thinking, okay, it's time for me to like do a new intro because every single episode has like the exact same intro. But the thing that's funny is like looking back on it, when we were first starting the podcast, like I was so petrified on like, what do I say to start? So I finally got in a rhythm with something, and then I've been really scared to break away from it. So
Don't break away. Yeah.
I will have something maybe else that I'll sprinkle in, but for now, we'll keep it the same. So to officially open the podcast.
Sorry, I was just going to say it's really funny the way Steve Hall and Pascal do it because they'll like alternate who introduces it some days and you never know what's coming. It's actually really funny.
Well, maybe we'll spring that on you sometimes.
Yeah.
But I won't do it on the spot. So here we go. Yeah. What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today is going to be part 2 of our August Q&A, even though it is now officially September. And then what we're going to do is explode one of the questions from last week, which is a little bit of hindsight looking back on our training careers and if there are things that we would like to change or wish we would have approached differently, which we'll have a little bit more input on. Before we dive into these questions, as always, we will cover some brief updates with ourselves. Brian, would you like to start us off?
Yeah. Well, today it finally happened. I slept in and missed our beginning of our podcast. So I feel like the listeners need to know this, that right now I'm 19 minutes late to our podcast and we're just starting. So biggest apologies to Aaron for having to sit there for 19 minutes without me. I think a combination of Labor Day yesterday and then for those of you who've been following my sleeping, breathing journey, I was just sleeping like a baby, you know, taking in all that oxygen and just didn't wake up. So not dead, just very well oxygenated today. But no, to get back on track with reality here, I did make a post yesterday on Instagram about my first 3 weeks of my kind of breathing journey here with my nasal breathing focus and the breathe strips on my nose. I showed up here to the podcast, forgot to take my breathe strip off, and Aaron was like, "What is that on your nose?" And so we had a little small off-air discussion about that. But so far, I'm now 3 weeks in to my mouth taping adventure at night. And to nasal breathing during bike rides and walking and cardio and all these things, and really enjoying the process. Give me something to really focus on now in my 41st year of life. So some people buy fancy cars. I decide to take my mouth and start breathing through my nose. So to each their own, you know. But overall, like just to be completely real, it has been an incredible 3 weeks of doing this, and I feel nothing but positive from it. The first 4 days, as I referenced in my post, were definitely rough, like trying to retrain my body to breathe in a different manner. Created some pretty poor sleep the first few nights, but since then it's been pretty amazing. When looking at the stats, like I dropped in my post yesterday, you know, the main profound ones I think are that sleep is up an extra half hour average per night over the last 3 weeks. And my wake ups in the night are down to about half of what they were. So they were like 2 to 3 or 4 times. And now I'm down to 1 or 2 times very consistently. So super positive in the first 3 weeks. I also dropped last week that I'd been doing these nasal only bike rides. And I think at the time I mentioned even just last week that I had hit an average of mid to high 130s on my heart rate and that I touched mid 140s just for like briefly and I couldn't hang out there because it was too strenuous. Well, then 2 days ago, I did another ride and I maintained my average was 147 beats per minute and I touched 156. So it's just insane to me how quickly all of these adaptations are happening. And it makes the process super rewarding, interesting, and invigorating to be able to see progress so rapidly. So that's my first update.
I guess I will jump into my first update is that since you have been doing this, it has intrigued me too. So while I cannot get access to any of the correct type of tape here to do it, and since I do have a pretty substantial mustache, I don't want to be pulling duct tape off of it. But I am leaving and we'll be back in the States by the time this episode drops, like 10 days after that. So that is already in the Amazon cart. But what I did start doing is on my posts. So I've been incorporating more like on my upper body days, 10 minutes of the stair climber post training. The reason I like that is it's just like harder. It's more of an effort than just like walking on the treadmill. And I've been wanting to spend a little bit more time nearing that like zone 2, 130s, 140s heart rate, but it's just really hard to do on an incline treadmill, but it's very easy to do on the Stairmaster or stair climber. So I have been doing that, and then I have been able to do it twice successfully, nasal breathing only. But I know like what setting I need to be. So I'm only on level 3, but level 3 nose breathing will keep me in like mid 140s range heart rate.
That's awesome that you can do that already immediately.
The first one was really, really challenging. Like I had to like, the thing that I kind of don't like about it is cardio just used to be like mindless, right? I could just like listen to a podcast or like scroll on my phone and get it done. But now I need to like stay concentrated on my breath rate or else like it falls apart really quickly. But once you do, what's been really cool is like I've noticed what I'll generally do is like I'll just get my heart rate up a little bit. Maybe I'll go to like level 4 or 5. That'll put my heart rate up like into the 150s, and then I scale it back down and start the process of like the nose breathing. And just like once I can get into my rhythm and like kind of catch my breath and I'm not like in that panic mode anymore, my heart rate will drop down like a noticeable like 6-7 beats once I'm like in that flow, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really rewarding, right? It's just like, I actually am really surprised and amazed that you have been able to, just in your first week of doing it, hit that like mid 140s, even low 150s briefly.
I think it's more so just how I'm not in good shape as opposed to anything else.
Right, but you still have to breathe it in like through the more efficient route through the nose. You have to process that oxygen and get it to kind of oxygenate your body. So yeah, that's amazing. Like I referenced in my post that 9 months ago I started just walking nasal breathing, which I had talked about on the podcast, and my heart rate was 90 beats per minute or something, and it was even hard for me to do that at first. And then when I started biking 3 weeks ago, doing it 110 or 115 heart rate was challenging. I couldn't even really get into the 120s. And so it's cool to be able to see that you're probably breathing more efficiently than me just from a baseline level.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
What else you got?
Okay, cool. So I do have a really big training update for myself, but before I get into that, big update for Paragon. So we are officially, I kind of hinted at this last week, but we are officially getting to a new app starting September 12th. So today is September 6th. As we record this, it will come out on the 13th, which means our new app will be out there and in use. Everyone will be transferred over there. In fact, the reason I couldn't talk about it last week is because today, 9/6, is the day that we're making the like broad sweeping announcement to the world. But I didn't want this episode to come out at 5 a.m. before Lori had a chance to announce this to the world a few hours later. So we are going to be changing to an app called Train Heroic, which is significantly better than Wodify. In the beginning, when we first started Wodify, it was the app to use. I mean, it was 2018. We were coming from a CrossFit background. Fisher, obviously was using Wodify along with Street Parking and a number of other big programs. And since that time, between Fisher and Street Parking, we're actually the third of them to leave Wodify. So we hung on as long as we could, but it just lacked a number of features that we wanted and needed. And so within Train Heroic, there's a few features that we really, really like, such as one is that you can swap exercises, which is super cool. So if you're, say that we program, like our physique program is both for a home gym and a commercial gym. So we have to choose a movement that's the featured movement, right? And so we went back and forth with this whole idea of like, do we choose the movement that is most accessible? Meaning that, if say the option is some sort of row. Do we choose the movement that's like a prone dumbbell row because everybody can do it? Or do we choose the movement that is most optimal for that situation, which may be a chest supported T-bar row or like a chest supported hammer strength row or something along those lines? But either way, like if we're choosing the one that's most accessible, then the people that are in a commercial gym are like, well, why am I being told to do a dumbbell row when there's a T-bar row here? And alternatively, the people at home would be like, well, why are you telling me to do a chest supported T-bar row when all I have is barbells and dumbbells? But ultimately, the swap feature is super cool because we put in the most optimal movement that is accessible. We decided something like a pendulum squat would never be the featured movement because it's just not accessible no matter where you are. But we could put in like a leg press as the preferred movement, right? And then people that are at home, underneath it says alternative movements you can swap for leg press. And it'll be like, you know, back squat, or depending on the goal, like heels elevated back squat or glute dominant back squat or whatever it is. Same with like the T-bar row, you know, alternate movements you can swap, and it'll be like a dumbbell variation or a barbell variation or whatever. So people can literally go in and swap movements on their own without having to like have the coach do it for them. So that's really cool. And then it has a community chat. So we can, people can ask questions instead of having to go into our Facebook group and ask the question there and then wait for a response. There's literally a chat for each program. So we have, 9 different programs on Paragon. If you're part of our 4D physique program, then you just go into the chat function, you ask your question, or you post a form check video or whatever it is. And eventually the coach will get back to you with some feedback on that. So those are 2 of my favorite features. Embedded videos are a huge one too. So you don't have to click a YouTube link and leave the app to go see a video. You just kind of like click the video in the app, it shows up and then it closes and boom, you're right there. No big deal. And it also gives us the option of creating static programs where you would literally just buy a program and then you can start it whenever you want, and it's not on a calendar. It just is a standalone program. And then we also have calendar-based programs like we did in Wodify, where you start on the date and you just kind of stay as consistent as you can through the dates and stuff like that. You can also move days. So if you feel like you're a few days behind, you can actually, when you go to do a day from say 4 days prior, it'll say, would you like to move this session to today? So there's just a number of cool little features like that. And we've been experimenting with it, using it in our own training for the last month and change since we decided to do this transition. So all of the coaches at Paragon are very familiar with the platform. And yeah, I'll stop it there and let you guys kind of experience it for yourself here in a week. But we're all very excited about that here.
I do have one question, and I'm hesitant to ask this question for if the answer is no, because then I don't want to. I'll be pissed I even brought it up, but here we go. Does it have, for the clients, is there a web interface for them to log into, or just the phone? Do you know? There
is a web interface. I am not super familiar with how that process goes from the client perspective, because I use the web interface to program, and then it ends up in the app. But I know that you can log in and you can view it from the web. I'm not 100% sure how that whole process works though.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's really, really cool from the Train Heroic team for doing that. Because I know that's like a point of contention for a lot of things, like especially for clients when you're like inputting feedback or uploading the video or whatever. Something like it's just things have moved so far mobile that a lot of tools don't even have like a web version, and then you're relegated to, using things on your phone. Like this is one of the reasons last year, 2 years ago, I moved away from my check-in system to start experimenting and exploring apps. And one of the like key feedback that I got from my clients, and when I went back was I am so sick of submitting my check-in on my phone because I have to type everything out on my phone. And I was like, you're right. It's a deal breaker. And I went back to my system, and it's been awesome ever since, because then I've added new things for it that of course everyone else benefits from. So really, really cool.
Yeah, definitely. That is a good question. I'm gonna have to ask Laura about how the clients do that from that perspective. But yeah, I know that I don't think I can even actually program from mobile. I think you have to go on desktop for me to write the program and like enter it in. Because the other day I was like, oh, I don't want this movement, I want to swap this other one. And when I went to swap it, it wouldn't like accept my YouTube link on mobile. So I don't think that I could actually program that. I mean, I'm still learning bits and pieces of it, but it's got a ton of features. And we're just like really excited to move forward with it. So, any update you want to jump into before I go into training?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with my training, right? So I have, I guess, 2 sessions, I think, left here, maybe 3. 2 sessions left of my Tuesday hack squat progression, which is like my hardest day of the week, but it's what, I get most excited about. I upped weight to 175 kilos for a set of 9, which is fantastic. Next week, I anticipate that I will get that coveted 10th rep at 175 kilos. So the following week, I can increase to 180 kilos, which will be 4 plates per side on the hack squat. The notable thing there is when I wrapped up the first strength block, when I was working with Alex, it was 180 kilos was my top set for the final week of that strength block. And I was able to get a set of 5. And I have a video of that. And that was at like a 1-0 RIR. So I am excited now. It'll be approximately 3 months later. So somewhere around like 12 weeks later, I will be taking that 180 kilos, and I am anticipating somewhere in the like 8 to 10 rep range, which is like really cool, tangible progress on the same piece of equipment under the same settings and stuff, which is really, really cool. I'm very excited for it.
Yeah, dude, that is awesome. That is like the definition of slow, steady grind. And like the rewarding aspect of this endeavor that we're part of that almost nobody could understand outside of this. Like, man, I showed up every Tuesday and took myself to this miserable, awful place so that I could potentially get 3 to 4 extra reps 12 weeks later.
12 weeks later.
Yeah. But like, it's so meaningful and so rewarding to us. And I just laugh about it sometimes when I try to put myself in the perspective of somebody from the outside that made, just jump into our podcast. Like I think of some of my friends from like college that don't really lift or whatever and be like, hey, listen to my podcast, check out this episode. And they're like, wait, you guys spent 12 weeks of killing yourself to get 3 reps. Like that's the way you live life. But no, it's amazing. Like it's what makes it special for us, and it gives us something to pursue and gives you purpose, and that's beautiful. I love it, man.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Cool. All right, well, big training updates from me. So I had all the best intentions of driving this mesocycle that I was in all the way through the 10th week. I did my frequency deload in mid-August when I went to the wedding, and then I made it another, 2.5 or 3 weeks after the frequency deload. So it was essentially, I made it through the beginning of week 9 on my program. And then as this stress of transitioning to the new app and writing a bunch of new programming and all that sort of stuff just kind of started to create additional psychological fatigue for me. And I was already in week 9 of my cycle. I just couldn't do it anymore. Like I'd hit my longtime goal, which was, speaking of slow progression, when I talked about 6 or 7 months ago, getting 1 rep on my hip extension with the hundreds and then doing a bunch of partials. And I stated that my long-term goal was I want to get 5 full reps and then a bunch of partials. Well, I hit that. And that was like the main thing I was focusing on this cycle. And once I did that, combined with all the psychological fatigue from the transition and all that stuff, I just didn't want to go through the last week of my training. I didn't have the gumption to get after it. So instead, what I did was I wrote my new cycle that's going to be starting on 9/12. And instead of 9/12 is going to be an intro week or whatever for the masses that are following Brian's program, B's program. But I decided that this week, the week of 9/5, I'm just going to do a casual run through of the new cycle. Not even at like what would be an intro week level, but more of like a deload. Just kind of going through the motions, feeling the flow of the training, making sure that it's going to just flow right, I think is the right way to say that. So I just started that yesterday. And the new program that I put together, I'm going back to a push, legs, pull. And I actually think it fits perfectly for what I need in my life right now. It takes me back off the calendar week. So I had gotten myself kind of back into the calendar week with my prior cycle. And now we're back off the calendar week. The way that I'm structuring this is that the first time through push, legs, pull, it's a chest priority on push day. It's a hamstring priority on leg day, and it's a lat priority on back day. And then the next time through, it's a delt priority on push day, a quad priority on leg day, and a upper back priority on pull day. So slightly different focuses each time through, but each non-focus muscle group still gets at least 3 sets or so. Yes, sir. Jump on in.
So by first time through, do you mean like sessions 1 through 6 have that specializations, and then like what would be 7 through 12? Do not.
No, it's
like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
1, 2, 3, and then the 4, 5, 6 are going to be the different focus, and then we'll go back to 1 through 3 with the same focus. So my goal is that this will be 9 to 10 calendar days. That's always been my favorite way to do the push pull legs, or push legs pull, or however you want to talk about it. Because I think that it makes a ton of sense if you can implement within the structure of your life to have a rest day before and after leg day. So it would essentially go like push, rest, leg, rest, pull. And then you would go right back to push again without a rest day. So you're kind of bracketing the leg days with a rest day on either side. And that's been really good for me psychologically, to have that rest day going into the leg session to really feel like motivated and excited. And then also to have that rest day coming out of it where I can recover and get a bunch of food in before going back to another upper body day. So the upper body days will pretty much be back to back. The leg days will be bracketed with rest days. The hamstring focused leg day, I only have pendulum squat as my quad movement. So it's going to be like 3 hamstring exercises and then boom, pendulum at the end. And then the other day, it's basically the opposite, where I'm going to have leg curls as one of my movements, and then a bunch of quad stuff. And then the other real change this time is I am actually not intending on doing RDL for a cycle. I have had a RDL variation in my programming for eternity. I actually can't remember in the last 5 years a time where I didn't have an RDL variation in. And I'm just going to experiment with it. I have hip extension in there. I have leg curls in there 2 or 3 times. I think one of the days on the hamstring focus day, I have leg curls twice. So this is another cool thing that I'm doing. We've had people on the podcast talking before about, and I've talked to Cass offline about this too, but the idea of putting isolation movements, like short overload movements, before lengthened overload movements. So this would be like your leg extension before your hack squat or something like that. And when I've talked to Cass about it, he's always been like, well, what if you did this by just taking your isolation movement to concentric failure, basically no forced reps, no lengthened partials, no reverse drop sets, anything like that. And then you do your compound movement, and then you come back to the leg extension. But when you come back to the leg extension the second time, you're now doing all that, like, pass failure, lengthened partials, reverse drop sets, whatever it is. So that is the way I'm implementing it this time. So both on hamstring day, I'm going leg curl, then hip extension, then back to leg curl. And it's leg extension, then hack press, then back to leg extension. So that's going to be a new thing implemented this cycle to see if I can still get the benefits of the kind of short then lengthened sequence without inhibiting my progress on the compound movement because I'm taking the isolation movement to the house prior. So those are kind of the big sweeping changes to my training this cycle. And then that will be available in the Train Heroic app under Brian's program for anyone that wants to follow along with that.
I really, really like that. I think it's really cool. I'm interested to hear more how that unfolds as in the coming weeks as we chat on the podcast. I think that can be like especially beneficial for people with limited equipment, and it gives you a little bit more options for training stuff with limited exercise availability.
Yep. No, totally. Yeah. Because you can use the same exercise in a different manner So yeah, very cool. What else is going on in your world?
Nothing else. I think that, or no, I guess last one I have officially, I think I hinted on this a few weeks back, officially started my first girl client in over 2 years. It's very new for me. I did do my due diligence on the intake form to make sure it is a game that I can win, or I should say we can win, which is much more appropriate. I still don't think it's something I will explore at large, but maybe I'll keep like 1 or 2 roster spots open for the right type of person. And it was just really interesting. This person framed it in a way that I just don't, I would have felt horrible saying no. You know, so I was like, you know what, these are my cards, right? I put my cards on the table first. I said, this isn't something I do a lot of. I'm a bit out of practice, but here are the questions I want answers to, and because I want to make sure that I can help you going into this. And it worked out. So I'm really, really excited about it. It should be fun. And I was more so like just flattered in the way the person asked for my help. So there's that, which is pretty cool.
If you don't mind talking about it, what are some of the things that you would look for or are looking for to take on a female client?
Yeah, so I want objective historical numbers of how much time was spent in a deficit, how much time was in caloric surplus, etc. I want numbers. I want to know around, I want to know what birth control they are on, the length they were on it. I want to know what cycle health is like. I want lab work. I want DEXA. I just want a lot more information so that I can make a lot more informed decisions. At the end of the day, I mean, coaching women and girls, however you want to, properly frame that, female, it's just harder, right? There's more moving pieces. You have a less resilient endocrine system to environment. And then you also get a lot of the, let's face it, from a male versus a female standpoint, the female is under much more societal pressures to look a certain way. They've been marketed to much more, especially, in the earlier 2000s and those sorts of things. And you just don't know how much of reformatting you need to do around psychological attachments to certain things, or saying like, oh, well, I can't eat more than 1,800 calories or something, but there's no objective reasoning to that. It's just something that's been negatively reinforced, sort of. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just harder to do, and it requires a little bit more intricate of an approach than I would generally take with my males, sort of thing. And it's just I've said this before, I never desire to be the coach for everyone. I want to hit home runs with people I know they can hit home runs for. It works for me. It works for them. It's fantastic. When I get things out of my wheelhouse, I would rather just refer out and say, no, I'm not a great resource for you, but I know someone who is. But sometimes when people are like, Aaron, I really want to work with you specifically, I'm like, okay. It's hard for me to say sorry.
Flattering. Yeah.
It is.
Sure.
It is.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about it. Just to do something a little bit different. It'll bring out the best in me and my coaching, sort of thing, and any kind of new things I need to learn, explore to make sure I deliver the best protocols and stuff I possibly can.
Sweet. I love that. All right, cool. Do you want to jump into some questions and see if we have time to get to this topic?
Yeah. We might end up just honestly finishing the questions, but here
and
we
then
go.
Doing the topic next week. Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah. That's my fault for being late.
So the first one is there evidence suggesting that whole foods are better than shakes?
Should I take a stab at this one first?
Let's have you take a stab at it, and then I'll circle back. Let's do that.
Yeah. I think that it kind of a bit goes back to the macros question of, do I just need to hit my macros? And I think that from a broad sweeping perspective of just looking at your physique development or your aesthetics, that, yeah, you can do it with shakes. I know you're going to touch on this, so I'm not going to steal your thunder here too much, but I think that you end up with some potential micronutrient issues if you're just doing too many shakes. You can have bowel movement issues through not getting enough fiber and things like that. You can have satiety issues through just not being full because everything's liquid. So I think that those are potential things that I'm sure you'll have more to add to. And then I also think that it kind of depends where you are in your nutritional periodization, because if you're in a bulk or in a surplus, then you may need to have shakes just to get enough calories, because it's hard to get a lot of food down. Whereas when you're in a deficit, even though I tend to over prioritize shakes just out of ease, like I'm a big fan of, the first 6 hours of my day just being kind of like protein shakes. And I guess you'd call it like some sort of version of a protein sparing modified fast is kind of what I do. But I do make sure that the latter half of my day is all whole food. So I think that you have a little bit more freedom with that when you're in a surplus and you have a ton of calories, and you probably have a little bit less freedom when you're dieting, and you should probably veer more towards whole foods.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the part around the periodization and the gaining phase. It has more practicality there because of you're solving a different problem. When you need to eat less food, volume is your best friend. When you need to eat more food and you're really full, volume is like kind of your nemesis at that point. In the context here, let's assume we're talking about like just, general health maintenance and fat loss sort of thing. Generally, you're going to get more nutrient density and more nutrient variety out of whole food based sources. From a calorie deficit standpoint, on paper, I'm sure there will be people that argue that like shakes can get the job done. There's a large gap, especially when we talk about fat loss, of things on paper and in practicality. Because even with shakes, let's assume that micronutrients are, equal here. We run into volume and satiety, right? And one of the biggest detriments to people with fat loss phases is being hungry and, having to deal with willpower. I'm using air quotes here for like the podcast listeners. The approach that I take with my clients is like, let's eat food so that you're not hungry and you don't have to flex your willpower muscle because you're not ever really that hungry. So that's where it really breaks down, is because shakes are already, let's call them processed in the form that you're not getting fiber and you're drinking your calories as opposed to chewing them, eating them, that sort of thing. And that's where it really will kind of, there's a reason why the best physiques, your natural bodybuilders, even your enhanced bodybuilders and stuff, are not just having like 40 shakes a day. They're having real foods because it stood the test of time for people who are dieting to very lean physiques.
Yep. No, well said. Should we jump into this next question?
Let's do it.
All right. Thoughts on nutrition protocol for high school wrestlers? 4 months of 1.5% body weight loss per week? Question mark, maybe?
This one, man, I really don't want to answer this question, to be completely honest, because I think it's just not good, right? I mean, I think it's one of the things where I feel like if you caught me a little bit younger in my life, I would have answered it differently, but I just know it doesn't turn out well for people. Wrestling, I get it. It's sport. And then there's obviously that trade-off of health to performance for sport type stuff. But 4 months of 1.5 body weight loss per week. So just to be clear, we generally say between 0.5% to 1% on the higher end of body weight loss per week. 4 months, 16 weeks at, the high end of that. You're covering a very, very large gap there. And my question would be like, what weight class are you trying to wrestle at? And why would you not give yourself a longer timeline so that you don't have to be as aggressive? Have they wrestled at this weight class before, or is something else, potentially missing? I know personally from my experience, like some of my best friends and stuff were wrestlers in high school. Some of them also played football. Like I remember our running back would go from 185 at the end of football season to wrestle 145, within a period of like maybe 6 to 8 weeks between seasons. It's really, really hard dieting and not really great. The protocol here is probably going to need to be stack what little carbohydrate you can actually put into the diet pre and post training sessions. And then it's going to be a lot of protein and vegetables. And I would 100% put this individual on a very comprehensive multivitamin with like methylated forms of folate and B12 and those sorts of things, zinc, magnesium, because your diet, you're very, very limited and it's going to be low calories and you're really just going to be feeding right pre and post workout so that you can get some semblance of recovery. I would not really recommend doing this whatsoever.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So when you do the math real quick, in 4 months, you look at it as about 17 weeks at 1.5% body weight loss per week. That's 25% of your body weight. So that reference that you made of 185 to 145, that's even slightly less than 25% body weight. So this person would essentially be going from like 200 to 150 or 160 to 120 or something along those lines. So 25% of body weight's a ton. And I don't envy that position, especially at that age. Like I think wrestling's one of those weird things where, like you said, it's a sport. And so you do what you have to do for the sport. But I feel like there has to be some components of stunting development that are happening there in those critical teenage years. So yeah, I don't have much to add aside from just a stroke of caution.
Yeah, big stroke of caution for sure.
Cool.
Okay, this next one will kick over to you, Brian, to start.
Okay.
During bulk, do we need to decrease fiber from fruits and vegetables because of high carbs?
I don't know about the because of high carbs piece. I do think that fruit and veggies probably naturally end up getting slightly decreased during a bulk for satiety, just because you're trying to fit an excess of calories into your day. Things that are extremely filling, like fruit and vegetables, are going to give you a lot of water. They're going to make you feel full for the amount of calories that you get. And so depending on your hunger at that time, how deep you are into your bulk, and kind of what other foods are filling the gaps in there, it's just tough sometimes to get them in. I think it's more common than it should be for people to avoid fruit and veggies almost entirely in bulks. And so that isn't, of course, something that I encourage, but I relate to it because I've certainly been there, where I am, sorry, my Google Docs just signed me out for some reason and I can't exactly figure out why. But yeah, I just feel like in a bulk, it's difficult to get those foods in at the end of the day, especially because you're so full, you're just trying to get the calories down that you need. And so one thing that I might consider would be the idea of trying to eat more fruits and veggies earlier in the day, and then eating a little bit more palatable foods at night, because then at least you can check that box, get your fiber and your micronutrients from your fruit and veggies, and then still be able to kind of eat food that's a little more interesting to you at the end of the day. So that'd be my thoughts there. How about you?
I would say if they are getting absurdly high and you are starting to suffer some GI related things, maybe you're a little bit backed up, constipated, or super, super gassy or really bloated, then let's look at where your fiber numbers are. That being said, I know personally myself, when I'm in a surplus, my fiber will get into the 50s, low 60s, no problem. I've had clients who we are pushing like 3,700 calories. Their fiber is creeping up into the 70s, even sometimes, no issues. I don't think it's something you need to do just because you are in a gaining phase. However, if you're like, let's say you're doing a shit ton of oats, right? Oats are pretty high in fiber. They're also known when you're eating them at higher volumes to maybe cause a little bit of GI distress. You can maybe swap some of those for lower fiber options, like a cream of rice would be a really great swap there, where you can get something that's going to digest a little bit faster, easier, but I wouldn't say you need to decrease fiber just because you are in a gaining phase. I would say from a relative standpoint to total caloric intake, it will go down, but from an absolute standpoint, your fiber is probably going to go up during a gaining phase.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. All right, let me kick this next one over to you. Is there a difference between optimal nutrition for longevity versus strength training? And I assume that strength training encompasses hypertrophy training as well.
Yeah, I would say yes, there is a difference. And specifically, the way I'm going to answer this is because of the term optimal, right? So eating for, let's call it optimal strength training and hypertrophy training. Like, let's call it eating for optimal gains. Carbohydrates are much better for fueling gains. Like, we know that. Higher protein intake is going to help us maximize muscle protein synthesis signaling, and we really want to be hammering that mTOR pathway. I would say for optimal nutrition for longevity, we are going to want a little bit more of that AMPK pathway, rob a little bit of those, I shouldn't even say a little bit, probably a moderate, or if we're using kind of subjective terms, of that carbohydrate to push over to anti-inflammatory, mono and polyunsaturated fatty acid sources to let us get just more polyphenols, flavonols, these sorts of things in that will really combat free radicals and anti-inflammatory processes, where when we're really, really pushing training really hard and a lot of carbohydrate, we will have some pro-inflammatory processes from this, right? We will get a little bit of oxidative stress and those sorts of things. So because the specific terminology here is optimal, yes, there is a difference. That being said, finding a good middle ground, if you really look into like the generally accepted information on like longevity, it's like super low protein, and a lot of like fasting and different things like that. People look quite frail. If we look in from what a lot of I shouldn't say leading, because CVD is the leading, reason us Americans are dying, but a lot of the risks and fears for old age is people falling over and like shattering bones because their protein is so low. They have their atrophied so poorly, sort of thing. So there's definitely a little bit of like a middle ground from hey, I need to fast all the time for autophagy and all of these things, but also if I fall over, something's going to shatter, and then that's probably going to end my life. Like with most things we talk about, what is best and practical for you is probably somewhere in the middle ground of the two extremes that are always presented. You're muted, Brian.
Totally muted. So I was actually going to focus mostly on the latter part of that you discussed, in that the longevity piece seems to be related to food restriction. And so strictly just from that one perspective of, hey, if you're trying to get stronger and put muscle on, you have to be in a caloric surplus. And if you want to live longer, you should probably restrict food and be in a calorie deficit. I think from like a very simple, like 10,000 foot view, it's just eating less food puts less stress on your body, your digestion processes and your organs and all these things. So Stronger by Science did a really deep dive into this exact question, maybe 3 to 6 months ago, I want to say, sometime in the early spring, possibly. But they literally spent maybe 40 minutes talking about this, and they covered the protein restriction, the autophagy and the fasting, and the caloric restriction. And then they also covered what you said, which was a great caveat about the falls and later in life, and having enough muscle and size and just bulk in your body to withstand some of this stuff. So I think that, like, if you were to design a perfect longevity protocol, you're probably going to eat a decent amount during puberty as your body is building and getting bigger, and you're going to use that time to put on muscle and, increase bone density and things like that. And then you probably spend most of your like late 20s to late 50s maybe in like a relative caloric deficit, just kind of letting your body not have to overexert itself in the digestion process and all of these other things. And then maybe as you get into like the later stages of life into your 60s and 70s, maybe you start eating just a little bit more, almost like you've built up this extra, what's the word I'm looking for? But basically you spent 30 years of your life restricting. So your body has like a fresh, I can't even like articulate what I'm trying to say right now, but basically spending the majority of your life in a caloric deficit, and then making sure that as you get into older age, having a little bit more bulk there to absorb these falls and stuff like that. So this is conjecture just coming from my brain, and that is not necessarily what Stronger by Science said in their podcast, but I would definitely check that out because I found it very interesting and intriguing. Even though I knew most of the data, kind of the way they phrased it and the perspective that they used was pretty interesting too.
One last little thing there, because I know we get a lot of women that listen to the podcast. Something came out of your mouth that I'm pretty sure you didn't want to come out of your mouth. And we just want to put a little caveat. You probably do not want to spend the majority of your life in a calorie deficit. Please do not do that. But what I think,
well, I mean, for longevity, I feel
don't get overweight and do what us Americans, do best pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is like they did actually in the Stronger by Science podcast, they did do a long-term study where people were like restricted down to like 40% of their caloric maintenance, and they held that for like a really, really, really long time. And there was correlative factors to improving longevity markers. So I mean, for what that's worth, like those people that are focused on longevity, like they literally do live their life in a caloric deficit for decades. So I think it's a balance, of course. Like, do you care about longevity? Do you care about strength training? I mean, you can probably toe the line of maintenance most of your life and just never get overweight and never be completely frail and weak. And I think at the end of the day, maybe that the difference is 1 to 4 years on the end of your life. Like, I feel like it's something like that. So the question then becomes like, do you want to live your life in this really restricted state for decades and decades so that maybe you have an extra 5 years of life at the end? Or do you just want to live a generally healthy lifestyle and because we're all an N of 1 anyways, like your exact situation may be unaffected by that, or you may even live longer from this versus being in a restricted state. So there's a lot of variables that go into that. But I do think that like long-term restriction is correlated on a general population level with a longer life.
Okay, understood. Thanks for clarifying that part.
Yep. You can only sleep if I'm dead tired. Tips for better sleep and how to avoid overthinking before bed.
Yeah, so generally for better sleep, sleep hygiene is a really, really good part. The first part of sleep hygiene is understanding and curbing your caffeine intake. Because like caffeine generally has a half-life of like 6 hours, right? Do not be one of those people who's taking your pre-workout at 4 p.m. that has 300 milligrams of caffeine if you're going to try and go to bed at pretty much any time before like 1 or 2 a.m., I would say. Alongside that, things that I am really, really big fan of, making the room as dark as possible, blackout curtains, those sorts of things, a sleep mask. If you are a sensitive auditory sleeper, earplugs, those sorts of things, making the room as cool as possible, around 65 degrees, which is actually quite cold, is pretty optimal for sleep temperature. And then avoiding don't be working on your computer till, right before you're trying to go to bed, or when you're doing like active mental, tasks, that sort of thing. And then how to avoid overthinking before bedtime. This could be a stress marker, right? So it could be you're in a period of elevated stress in your life. Maybe you're, under a lot of work related stress, those sorts of things, and you kind of can't turn your brain off. Something that you can try is L-theanine in the evenings, generally in around the 200 milligrams mark. Different types of ashwagandha that you can look into can generally help there, or taking melatonin a little bit earlier as well, are all kind of tips there. But I would start with the first domino of when is your final caffeine intake of the day and start moving that forward.
Yeah. No, well said. I just want to jump on something somewhat related here that you mentioned, the L-theanine. So about a year ago, I heard, again, Stronger by Science, talking about how theanine combined with caffeine actually creates a much better experience than just caffeine by itself. And so I started doing this. You want to take the theanine in a 2-to-1 ratio to caffeine. So in the morning, I usually take 200 to 300 milligrams of caffeine with 400 to 600 milligrams of L-theanine. And I actually always felt like caffeine made me a little too jittery and like hyper focused and a little bit of anxiety in my brain, like at least in the beginning when it would kick in. And since the last year, combining it with L-theanine, I feel like caffeine is a much smoother and enjoyable experience for me. So if anyone wants to consider that as something to do in the morning, that may help, but that's completely unrelated to the sleep thing. So, regarding sleep, I think temperature is a huge one. 65, I would love to keep my room at 65, but it's always a bargaining thing with Kim a little bit because we have the green side of not, making our house excessively cold unnecessarily, along with the fact that she just doesn't like to be as cold when she sleeps. So we settle at like 70 or 71. But yeah, 65 would be wonderful. I think that would do nothing but help my sleep. We use white noise, really great white noise machine that we got on Amazon. It's like $60. It's this little like grayish black unit that has 7 or 8 different settings on it. I love white noise. It helps me sleep really well. I also find that if I ever am like in that state of overthinking and my brain going crazy before bed, all I have to do is pick up a book. It doesn't even matter what kind of book. I know some people tell me that fiction or nonfiction are important factors here. Like Kim, for example, can be reading fiction and it'll be midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and she'll just keep reading and forget that like she's supposed to go to sleep. So for other people, I think nonfiction might be just a better choice because it's more dry. But man, like within 10 minutes, 5 minutes of opening up a book and trying to read, I'm just like, what am I doing right now? I need to go to sleep, So, so that may or may not work for you as well. I also often like listening to podcasts for whatever reason. This is really funny, but Revive Stronger and the English accent and the German accent of Pascal and Steve, for some reason, listening to them back and forth, my brain just like it just turns to like mush and I fall asleep. And then I'll wake up like an hour later with like them being like, okay, bye, see you guys later. And I'm like, oh, guess I just finished the podcast, set my headphones down, go to sleep for real at that point. But finding little things like that just kind of soothe you off to sleep are super helpful. And then for whatever it's worth, if you do CBD or THC or a combination of both, I believe the term is sleep latency, which is, actually getting to sleep. So THC has not been associated with good quality sleep throughout the night sleeping, like you tend to wake up a little more and stuff like that. But it is very, very effective at sleep latency as far as getting you to sleep. So I know a number of my friends that don't really like to be high, but they'll take like a 5 milligram THC gummy with CBD in it or something like that. And that seems to do the trick for most people that I talk to.
Yeah, those are all great additional inputs. You brought up something really good with maybe your significant other doesn't want to be freezing in the middle of the night. There's a company called Chili Sleep that makes this thing called a chili pad. It is kind of pricey, but I think they've like branched out into some other different things, and you can it slides under your side of the sheets, and then it can like make your part of the bed like significantly colder while not, making your other significant other suffer. Or also it may be greener than running your house at 65 also.
Yep. Totally. We have 6 minutes left and 2 questions. So let's jam through these as quick as we can. And then I got to bounce and get the kids to school. I'll just take this one real quick because I have a thought on it. Static stretching directly after a resistance training session to increase hypertrophy. And so I think that my answer a few weeks ago would have been maybe, like possibly. There seems to be good mechanistic data to potentially suggest this. And then there was just recently a calf study that came out where they literally just stretched the calf for an hour under load, and there was significantly more hypertrophy from the group that stretched versus the group that did not. It was literally something like, I think it was 13 point something % increase in hypertrophy in the leg that stretched the calf and 1% in the leg that didn't. And that actually isn't surprising because there is some correlative effects, like crossover effects that we know when you talk about injury and we're like, hey, if that side's injured, just train this side and it will actually help your other side type thing. So it doesn't surprise me that the non-stretched calf gained 1% or 1.2% or whatever it was. But the fact that the calf that was stretched gained 13+%, that's huge. And so this just further provides proof and concrete evidence that the stretch mediated hypertrophy thing is real. And so I'm not ready to say that you just straight up static stretch, like, you know, you do RDLs and then you do a like sit and reach test. I don't think that necessarily is going to help you too much, but I think that stretching under load has significant benefit. One perfect case in point is I just changed my dumbbell fly press in my program to being a 3-second pause at the bottom of every rep. And I had like 3 people write me and be like, bro, you're just doing an isometric. Do you think isometrics are effective? And I was like, bro, did you see this calf study? And so, yes, I do think that weighted isometrics are effective. And I'm even doing it in my dumbbell fly press now. So 3-second pause at the bottom, stretch it out. And then it's just one dynamic contraction and then right back down to like a 3-second isometric. And we will see how that works over the course of this next cycle.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, in our episode with Milo Wolf, he talked about this study because it had like just come out. That being said, I do think in this study they were stretching it for an hour per day.
They were.
So if you're stretching for like 4 minutes post-workout, you know, it may not have, you might just need a lot more time, and it obviously becomes opportunity cost on your time. But yes, I think taking that in terms of spending more time in the lengthened position, maybe adding pauses for your lengthened overload movements, some in a pause can have more hypertrophic carryover.
Yep. And I don't know if like I don't think I'd ready to sign on the line and say static stretching by itself, not under load. I don't know if that necessarily is something that I'm going to put money on and say, yes, that's going to be an effective tool for hypertrophy.
Yeah, I'm definitely, it might, but I'm not going to spend the time to do it. Yeah. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Last question is, should you be hitting failure when cutting?
As always, it depends. It depends on how you're managing the other factors of your training program and your lifestyle. This is going to vary, like I said, person to person. I will still train to failure with certain things when I'm cutting. However, I'm able to throw a lot of resources at this, and my calorie deficits are very well managed because I just have a little bit more skill acquisition and time spent doing so. I would say depends on the exercise as well. I'm not going to recommend hitting failure in a deadlift or something like really compound and where safety may be a risk factor. But if we're talking like lateral delts, we're talking triceps, biceps, calf raises, there's nothing wrong with hitting failure in those muscle groups while you are in a calorie deficit.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is that the training that got you there is pretty much the training that you want to take through your deficit as well. And so to your point, like I never, in the way that I design programs, I never have those big compound damaging lengthened movements like the deadlift, the pendulum squat, the hack squats, the split squats, things like that. Those never go to failure for me, really. I mean, maybe if I'm at the very end of a cycle in a surplus and I just want to like test my limits, kind of like you with your hack squat in 2 weeks when you want to see what you can do with 180 kilos. For sure. Like there are opportunities where you can do that strategically and thoughtfully. But in general, if I'm taking my leg extensions, my leg curls, my tricep pushdowns, and my spider curls to failure in a surplus, they're also going to failure and probably past failure in a deficit too. So I would just say that you want to make sure to do all the things that you know to do, like bracket your training with carbohydrate and protein. Make sure that you're not doing this fasted or that you're going, 4 hours after your workout without some sort of nutrition. You make sure that all your lifestyle factors like your sleep and stuff are in order. Your stress isn't too high. And there should be no reason that you can't still take those short overloaded movements to and past failure.
Yep. The last little bit I will say is if any of your tendons are screaming at you, especially around like your elbow flexors, your elbow extensors, things like that, just be smart because calorie deficit, there is higher propensity of risk of tendon rupture, those sorts of things. Don't be stupid there.
Yeah, I think that I agree 100%. That's a great point. But I also think that a lot of that comes down to exercise selection and execution. And so if you're feeling, your elbow hurt on whatever kind of curl variation you're doing or tricep extension, maybe just try a different one. Like try a one-arm cable curl and try a cable tricep push down instead of a skull crusher, or whatever it is. I used to be filled with elbow issues in CrossFit from rope climbs and all the pull-ups, being pronated and all these things. And even with barbell curls, like in the early hypertrophy days, things like that would bother me because you're just locked into this position. But as soon as I would switch to a D handle on a cable machine, in a matter of a couple weeks, it would dissipate. So, maybe look at the exercises you're choosing as well.
Definitely.
Cool.
Anything else on this one, Brian?
Nah, I think we'll hit that topic on our training careers next week.
We will. As always, guys, thank you for listening. Brian and I will talk to you next week.